Hello and welcome to Lunchable Go-to-Market Ops. We're your host, Sarah Lane-Hawn, and
Danielle Urban.
serving up grab and go HubSpot strategy every weekday in 15 minutes or less, hopefully. In today's episode, we're actually going to be talking about some elements of data architecture, specifically using workflows to enable custom object associations to inform other associations. And I'll get into that a little bit of what that means. So, Danielle, this came up the other week for me, and I know I'm not the only one when I had built custom objects to hold event criteria for a client.
Mm.
And so we were associating contacts with every event that they registered to or attended. We're able to report on it. It's all lovely. It's affecting their attribution model. And then the CEO came and asked a very simple question, which was, great, now on a company, can I see all of the events that anyone in their company attended? And I'm like, that's a simple question. Sure, we can of course do that. Leading to me going in for 30 minutes, poking around, realizing there is not an easy way to actually do that. Very straightforward question. So what I ended up doing was playing around with some workflows, with association limits and criteria, and figuring out kind of a two-step protocol that works at least for this specific scenario. And I'm sure there's other scenarios where we've run into issues like this as well. Is there stuff that you have personally tried to do around
Always.
associations for associations?
It always comes down to attribution too, because you want to see how things link together to understand where they came from. So like this comes up so often, and I usually end up doing some weird list solutions.
Okay.
And I love that we can use workflow to enable associations because previously our only solution really was to use associate or write
Yes.
your own custom code to make it happen.
Yep.
But I know, I think it was over the summer,
Yep.
HubSpot released the beta, and now it's fully available to associate objects using workflows. I know there are a lot of limitations to it, though, so I'm
Mhm.
curious. I haven't actually used those workflows very much in real life. Lots of theory and helping people figure out how to do it, and testing things on my own. But I have not actually used the associations in a workflow to help a client accomplish anything. So I am really excited to learn from you today.
Yeah, it does have its own limitations because it needs to be very specific to know exactly what you're associating, what label of association you're going to be using, right? And how you're going to be matching things up. So there's just a lot of specificity to it. That said, I'm glad you called out. It could not be done before, right? We
Hmm.
didn't have this ability. So if you've had your HubSpot instance for over a year, this is something you should go and look into because it couldn't be done. Now there's things that can be done. So if you're running events specifically, you can use this example. If there's other things that you're using custom objects or want to use custom objects to store as its own data set, this might be applicable for that need as well. So I'm going to try to share my screen and I'll actually walk you through the two. Let's see. Here we go.
I see it.
So there's two workflows, like I said, that I have kind of building off of each other in order to accomplish this. The goal being we know which contacts are associated with an event as a custom object. We want to know then which companies should also be associated with that event. And there's not a good way to do that because we're looking at three different objects, multiple association layers, and there's just not a good way to consolidate that. So how I'm doing it here is I'm actually having the event itself, the custom object, run through a workflow every time the event finishes. And it's just going to go, and for every contact who is associated as an attendee, I'm just going to copy over the event name and put it on a contact field saying this was the last event they attended. So pretty
Smart.
simple steps there. Just everybody who attended the event, I'm going to copy over their event name and say, yep, that was the last event they attended. Where it gets tricky is then in this second workflow, I'm going to then run through companies based on if their associated contacts have that last event attended field having been updated recently. So if so, the company goes through and it's actually going to copy that last event attended name into a company level field for last event attended. And there's a reason why we're copying the same thing over and over. And it's because of how the actual association requirement does. So what we're trying to do all along is this simple last step. We're trying to associate the company with the hosted event itself. We want to say that they, as a company, had somebody attend, but the way that we're going to create the association is by matching a property value. So there has to be something on the company record that matches the event custom object record. That's where it gets really hard to actually make use of this association in a workflow. And so what we're doing is we're using this last event attended field where we're copying it from event to contact, contact to company, and now we're using it back to link company to event. And that's what we're going to be able to say, okay, if the event name and the last event attended are the same, now we can create those associations between the company and the event record. So it's a very circular path. We're very much saying we know the event, we know the contacts attended, let's pass the name of the event through. Great, we know the company whose contacts are associated, let's pass that event name through. Now we finally have enough information to connect the company back to the event itself. So that is the method that we ended up figuring out. It works for this particular scenario. But again, reason being, if you want to see something not just on the contact basis or not just on the company, but you're trying to associate a different object level, you've got to have something to be able to map one to the other.
Yeah, I can think of so many examples of that though. Like even my brain is stuck in sort of the school world because we're enrolling my younger daughter in preschool, and it's
Okay.
actually shockingly and disturbingly time to start thinking about summer camps
Yeah.
for childcare over the summer. Some registrations opened in October, and I hate those people. So thinking about, I have two kids that I need to get into camp. When you have that kind of example, you've got the camp itself, who's probably running their CRM. You've
Yep.
got me as a parent. You've got their registration in which group or which camp they're registering into. And I have two kids. So you have three different objects that would need to associate together there, where you need to know like the parent and the child have a relationship and the program with the child and whatever, me as the parent needs to be linked to those two because I'm the billing contact. All these pieces need to connect together, and it's the same function. Like you would use
Yeah.
those exact same workflows to create that relationship between everybody. And so it really just comes down to the data architecture, what needs to be where for you to get the right level of reporting and the right understanding of what's happening across your business. Like get all
Yep.
those pieces connected. So I love this example. I'm curious if you use the association in any other contexts. I have one failed attempt that I can talk about, but I'm curious if you have any other
This is
successes.
this is the one that's top of mind for right now, just because it's the one that I most recently solved for. But one of the things that I think is interesting is you could build something similar, but as we talked about in our previous episode this week, it would end up accumulating a ton of field values or a ton of fields, right? Like if you wanted that last event attended to equal something and it was a drop down list and I had to put every single event that we ever had, right? It would get unruly. So instead, I'm using it as just a text field and it's temporary. And I think that's one of the data architecture pieces we forget to necessarily educate people on who aren't from an ops background is the idea of a temporary field, that it's
Mhm.
okay if it gets overwritten. There are certain things that you want to keep forever, and
Mhm.
that custom objects are a great place for that forever information to live. And then there's other places where it's okay that it's temporary because it's just being used to trigger workflows and move things down the funnel. You don't
Mhm.
need to know that the last event attended 3 weeks ago was this event name and it's different today. No, it served its purpose. It was in there. It got moved through. It was out of there. So I did want to call that out again. But tell me about your failed attempt with associations because now I'm curious.
Yeah, it's that exact match that gets you.
Yeah.
So what I was trying to do for a couple different clients was recreate their asset library so that each asset in their library exists as a custom object record. So
Okay.
then we can associate contacts in the exact same way you would with an event. We can associate contacts, we can associate companies to what that last thing was or what the entire library of things that they've interacted with, so that you
Mhm.
have that context when you go to talk to them. You can see everything they looked at, because some people might get in there and download 16 different things. Some
Right.
people might go download one and leave. And so you can see those dates. It's incredibly helpful context for the sales team to have a much more personalized conversation, which you have to break through the noise these days.
Right.
And so what I was trying to do, instead of building out their entire library, because in one of my clients, they've got tens of thousands of
Right.
things that we'd have to push in there. One of them, it's much smaller, so I was able to build it out. But I was trying to pull from the last conversion property and
Yeah.
get that map to the object that we have, instead of having to build a property that holds the name of the thing, and then create the association that way. And because last conversion is the name of the page plus the name of the form, I would have to do like a partial match, and you can't
Hmm.
do that yet. I hope that we see that soon, because it means that that build goes from, a few clicks and setting up the custom object to like rebuilding things on the contact level, so that you
Yeah.
can capture it and then translate it. And then, like, when you have more than like 20 assets in your library, that goes out the window. Like,
Yeah.
forget it. So with one of my clients, I was like, yeah, no, just kidding, sorry. And the other one, I like went through the exercise, which was a really good learning exercise for me to
Yeah.
understand how the pieces fit together and how this works. But yeah, you can't use partial matches here.
Yeah. There's a level of scale with just about anything where, like, at
Yeah,
a certain point, it's no longer going to work to check those check boxes. We're going to need something that's a little bit more dynamic.
yeah,
But it also makes sense because if there's millions of options, right, nobody's going to take the time to go sift through all that and be able to have a curated like response to all of it either. And then we can have a whole nother conversation topic about this, which we probably need to be writing these ideas down. But the idea of assets by category, whether it's by part of funnel that they're targeting, or like a core column topic, or whatever, however you're doing your content strategy, but tagging and bucketing your assets in that way. And then instead of having all assets listed in custom objects, just having asset types listed and then having associations to those. That would be a really interesting, I think, use case too, because then, again, if you're producing tons and tons of content, maybe your sales rep doesn't care necessarily what the piece was, but understanding what the topic was and what that means from a pain point perspective of the client, like, is enough to then guide the next piece of the conversation. So I think that would be an interesting conversation of like all the different methods that there are out there,
yeah.
of how to actually go about doing something like that from a contact perspective.
Yeah.
But yeah, with the associations, anyone in particular, like I said earlier, anybody who hasn't looked at this in the last year, I think just needs to look back at associations because I wasn't using them
Yeah.
last year for anything, and now I
They were
love them
manual.
and kind of want to use them for everything.
Yeah.
But anybody else that you think has a particular need for diving back in to associations?
Yeah, I was just going to say the rollout of this feature replaced so many workflows that existed to copy information over. And we even got sync properties like a year ago, and those are really helpful for sort of projecting one piece of information onto another record type. But you're limited, of course, in the type that you can use that with. I think it's only drop down. It's basically structured data that you're limited to. You can't do an open text property for that.
Yeah.
And you are limited in how many you can have. And so when you get into custom objects, it gives you a lot more flexibility. One more example that I've seen associations work really, really well just in general, is I have one of my clients where they have a deal close and then they need to do some things. They need to have their build team sort of build the thing and set up accounts and get it ready to actually ship out to their clients.
Yeah.
And with that, I coach them to set up some ticket pipelines and have different ticket types for the build types that they need to get done. So those tickets are associated to deals. And I think they're just doing it through an automation. So when you create something in an automation, when you create a new record type, it automatically associates it to the one that's enrolled already. So we haven't had to do too much with cleaning up the associations or labeling them. But it allows them to use deal labels in their cards to show the status of that ticket and that
Yeah.
onboarding flow, which is
No, that makes a
amazing.
lot of sense. The other one that I was just realizing, you asked me for other examples of association tapes, and one of the ones that I've done most recently is a finance company who often has their groups get bought out by bigger umbrella firms. And so the data is constantly changing, but you don't want to lose visibility into like who was associated where in the past. And so we created a lot of systems and workflows to manage basically not only parent companies and child companies, but umbrella companies and past
Oh, we talked
business
about that one.
like names, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of layers, but it's so that we can still have all the data roll up into the umbrella and report on it. But then we're not losing the historical insights either of like this individual group of humans who have sold our product, right? Like this is what we know about them historically. We're not losing it because we're just merging them all together and being like, whatever, you're all one huge company now. So that was another really useful association label tip and trick and
Fun.
reason
Yeah,
to use
that's
it.
always
So,
hard. And we knew we were going to struggle to stay at 15 minutes with this show, and we are over. But we are very excited to keep this going. And in our next episode, we'll be talking about multi-select field updates and features and some hacks you can use to keep those clean. So we'll see you tomorrow.
perfect. See y'all.